There is a phase on the awakening path that no one talks about, no one celebrates, and very few dare to name. It's the moment after the light has come on, when life doesn't sparkle the way it used to, when the old hunger for success, approval, identity, and survival collapses. And in its place, something far heavier arrives. It is not despair, but more like a deep, heavy stillness that whispers a terrifying sentence inside you. I don't want to die, but I don't want to exist either. People expect awakening to feel like clarity and finding purpose, but for many, it feels like the floor disappears. The roles you once played stop making sense. The stories that once fueled you lose their charge. You're still here, paying bills, making food, speaking to people, yet something inside has already stepped outside the game. You don't feel suicidal, you feel post-survival, as if the part of you that was designed to chase life has quietly retired. This is where the phrase ego death stops being poetic and starts being physical. Carl Jung never framed awakening as an endless rise into light. He warned that when the old self dissolves, there is a long interval where meaning collapses before it reorganizes. The psyche dismantles its former scaffolding before it can build a new one. And during this collapse, the nervous system doesn't feel enlightened. It feels disoriented, empty, suspended in a silent waiting room between who you were and who you are becoming. The desire not to exist is born here, not from wanting to die, but from losing attachment to being someone. For years, your ego kept you moving through desire, fear, ambition, comparison, and longing. Even pain gave you structure. Then awakening arrives, and the structure melts. You see through the illusions that once motivated you. You recognize the masks. You detect the unconscious games. You sense the mechanical nature of the world. And suddenly, the question isn't, how do I succeed? It becomes, why participate at all? This is not pathology or a defect. This is a threshold state of consciousness. In depth psychology, when the ego dies faster than the deeper personality can reorganize, the psyche enters a vacuum. In this vacuum, nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels meaningful in the old way. The will disconnects from survival-based goals. Desire goes silent, not because it is wounded, but because it no longer recognizes the old objects as real nourishment. From the outside, people may think you are sinking into apathy or depression. Inside, what you feel is stranger than that. You can sense reality more clearly than ever, yet you don't feel pulled by it. There is awareness without appetite, presence without attachment. You are awake, and that is exactly why existence feels optional. Spiritual traditions describe this as the death of the false self. Buddhism speaks of the dissolution of craving. Mystical Christianity writes about the long purgation between selves. Sufism calls it the annihilation of the personal will. Jung mapped it psychologically. When the ego loosens its grip, the unconscious floods the field. And when meaning was previously supplied by the ego, its collapse feels like losing gravity. This is why the desire not to exist feels so confusing. It carries no violence, no panic, no despair. It feels neutral and flat, almost neutral enough to be mistaken for peace, but not really. It is the sense that the old contract with life has expired and the new one hasn't yet been written. Many people at this stage fear they have gone backward. They search for ways to feel normal again. They try to revive motivation, attraction, and hunger. But what they are really grieving is the death of their old psychological engine. The system that once ran on fear and craving can no longer power the next phase of their becoming. The nervous system doesn't know how to live without appetite yet. So existence feels heavy, not painful, not urgent, just unnecessary. Days continue, you function, you speak, you eat, you work. But the old inner yes to life is gone, and in its absence, a terrifying neutrality takes its place. This is where many mistake transformation for collapse. But collapse is only the first movement. The psyche cannot stay in the vacuum forever. Something older than survival begins to stir. A layer beneath the ego, a layer that does not live for validation, performance, or fear, starts organizing in silence. And until it is ready to speak, you remain in the in-between. Alive, aware, unattached, and secretly waiting for a meaning you can no longer manufacture. After the old psychological engine shuts down, the body is the first to notice. The mind may still understand what happened, but the nervous system is confused. For years, it learned to move based on pressure, urgency, identity, reward, and threat. Now, those signals weaken. The body waits for instructions that no longer arrive. This is where many people feel hollow, flat, and distant from hunger for life itself, and they don't understand why. Psychology explains this as a regulatory shock. The ego once provided constant stimulation, goals, fears, fantasies, tension, and pursuit. When that structure dissolves, the nervous system drops into a low arousal state. It is not depression in the classic sense, it is deconditioning. The system is unlearning its addiction to survival-based motivation. From a spiritual lens, this stage is the death of compulsive becoming. The mind no longer rushes toward the next version of itself. The identity that needed to prove its worth has loosened. The will that was sculpted by lack has run out of fuel, and instead of instant freedom, what arrives first is silence inside movement. This is why the desire not to exist feels bland rather than tragic. It is not about escape from pain. It is about the absence of inner pressure. No inner push, no chase, and no urgent pull toward the future. The personality is still here, but the driver has stepped out of the seat. In Jungian language, this is the moment when the ego no longer dominates the psyche, but the self has not yet taken the throne. The conscious mind floats without an organizing center. The inner hierarchy dissolves before it reorders itself at a deeper level. This is why people say, "I don't feel like a person the way I used to." That is not metaphor. The psychological structure that once defined personhood is literally rearranging. Other psychological frameworks describe a similar process. In existential psychology, this is the collapse of meaning structures. In trauma-informed therapy, it resembles a freeze response without fear. In transpersonal psychology, it is called a non-ordinary state of consciousness. Different languages, same terrain. The danger here is not that the desire not to exist appears. The danger is when the mind interprets it through the old survival lens and decides something has gone wrong. Because from the old ego's viewpoint, stillness feels like failure. The ego was designed to strive. When striving dissolves, it panics. It labels the void as sickness, regression, or loss. But from a deeper psychological position, this void is not absence. It is unoccupied space. And unoccupied space is where the deeper personality can finally assemble without interference. This is why forcing motivation back rarely works. Trying to get your old self back increases inner conflict. You are asking a dissolved structure to resurrect itself in a psyche that has already outgrown it. The nervous system resists because it knows something irreversible has happened. What actually begins to grow here is a quieter form of being. A mode of functioning that does not originate from hunger, lack, or fear. At first, it feels empty because it does not speak in cravings. It speaks in subtle orientation. You may notice faint changes, sensitivity to what feels false, intolerance for internal contradiction, withdrawal from meaningless rhythms, attraction to simplicity without effort. This stage feels disorienting because it offers no dopamine-rich signals. There is no dramatic pleasure and no rush of becoming, just an unfamiliar neutrality that slowly reshapes perception. Spiritual traditions describe this as the desert phase. Not punishment, but a preparation. The excess noise of the psyche has been stripped so that a different intelligence can surface. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projection, when the soul no longer externalizes its meaning onto people, achievements, or future fantasies. When projection retracts, the world loses its glow. But what replaces it is not darkness. It is depth without decoration. This is also why relationships feel different. You may no longer feel pulled to perform, impress, cling, or merge. Old emotional strategies fall apart. You start seeing people without the filter of need. And that can feel isolating at first, because need was once the invisible glue holding everything together. The desire not to exist is therefore not a wish for disappearance. It is the psyche's way of saying, I no longer recognize myself in the old shape of life. You are still alive, still present, still aware. But the reference point that once defined existence has dissolved. And until a new center stabilizes, life feels suspended between meaning and neutrality. This is not where the process ends. This is where the deeper reorganization begins. What eventually shifts is not motivation in the old sense. What returns is orientation. Not the restless urge to become someone, but a quiet recognition of where life now wants to move through you. This is the moment Jung described as the emergence of the self, as the new organizing center of the psyche. The ego no longer runs the system, but it still exists, now in service rather than command. The desire not to exist fades, not because life suddenly becomes exciting again, but because existence is no longer experienced as a personal burden. It becomes participation rather than effort. You still feel fatigue, you still feel limitation, but the inner resistance softens. You stop arguing with being here. This is where many people misunderstand integration. They think awakening ends with bliss. In reality, integration is the slow shaping of a life that can hold the consciousness you now carry. The psyche must learn how to live without the old fuel sources. A new form of energy begins to take their place, not driven by hunger, but by inner alignment. Meaning returns differently now, not as ambition, not as fantasy, and not as identity. Meaning becomes relational rather than performative. You may feel it when something quiet feels true, when a choice feels clean, or when your body relaxes into an action without inner bargaining. This meaning does not shout, and it does not promise greatness. It simply feels honest. Spiritually, this is the movement from awakening to embodiment. Awareness is no longer an escape from the world. It becomes the way you inhabit it. The nervous system slowly learns to move without panic. Pleasure becomes subtle but steady. Even discomfort changes texture. It no longer feels like threat. It feels like weather passing through. Jung warned that many people remain trapped in the liminal phase because they romanticize the death but resist the rebirth. It is easier to live in the identity of the one who has seen through the world than to actually re-enter life without illusion. The desire not to exist can quietly become a refuge, a way to avoid the vulnerability of participating again. But participation now has a different quality. You no longer barter yourself for validation, and you no longer chase reflections of worth. You engage because something in you resonates, not because something in you lacks. This is also where the shadow returns in a new way. Earlier, it was dismantled alongside the ego. Now it reappears as raw vitality. Anger, passion, desire, creative force, all resurfacing without the old distortions. Not suppressed, not compulsive, but integrated. The shadow stops acting as an enemy and begins to behave like power with conscience. People describe this phase as ordinary life with unfamiliar depth. You still work, you still relate, you still choose. But the inner posture has changed. You are less impressed by the world, yet more intimate with it. You need less from it, yet feel more inside it. From a spiritual angle, this is what many traditions call returning to the marketplace after the vision on the mountain. You no longer seek transcendence as escape. You live as awareness within form. The mystical becomes practical, the cosmic becomes human, and this is perhaps the greatest twist in the whole process. The desire not to exist was never pointing toward absence. It was pointing toward a new way of existing that had not yet taken shape. What dissolves during ego death is not life. It is the idea of life you were unconsciously serving. Once that dissolves, existence must be rediscovered without pre-written meaning. And that rediscovery takes time, because the psyche does not move by insight alone. It moves by rhythm, by regulation, and by gradual trust in a new inner gravity. Slowly, the nervous system learns that being here no longer requires performance. The heart learns to attach without losing itself, and the mind learns to rest without collapsing. And slowly, the will returns, not as pressure, but as preference. You begin to choose again, not because you must, but because something inside now leans toward life in a cleaner way. Jung called this individuation the movement toward becoming what you were before fear taught you who you should be. Not perfection, not enlightenment as a costume, but coherence. A life where inner and outer no longer fight for control. The desire not to exist was a message from the depths, not a verdict. It was the psyche saying, the old version of living is no longer viable. And once that message is listened to rather than resisted, existence reorganizes itself around a quieter, truer center. You don't return to who you were. You return as someone who no longer needs to leave themselves to live. If any part of this felt like it was speaking directly to where you are right now, I'd love to hear your story. What has been the hardest or most confusing part of your awakening so far? The emptiness, the loss of motivation, the identity shift, or something else entirely? Share it in the comments so you're not carrying it alone. And if you want to keep exploring the deeper layers of the psyche, transformation, and what it really means to awaken in everyday life, make sure to subscribe to Fractal Wisdom. Remember, you are not lost. You are in the middle of becoming.